Great. Well, thank you very much, Bella, and welcome everyone. So we're from Castalia, and we're really pleased to be presenting to you this evening on the work that we're doing and some of the exciting projects that we do. And we propose to just talk for about, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for your questions. And look, if you do have a burning question as we go through, please just raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and we can pause and answer questions as we go as well. So we'll just be very flexible. So we'll just introduce ourselves. My name's Andreas, and I'm a director based in the Wellington office. So we've got a Wellington and an Auckland office at Castalia in New Zealand Pacific. So I have a legal background and an economics background, and I specialise in the intersection between law and economics and advise corporations and government clients on all sorts of issues across the water sector, energy transition, competition and regulation. So I've got a background in the Treasury and also in law firms, and I've been with Castalia for five years, four and a bit years. And I'm joined by Freya.
Hi everyone, my name's Freya Tierney. I'm a senior analyst at Castalia. I've been with Castalia for just under 2 years, so nearly 2 years in May. So I kind of focus on economics and policy research and analysis across a range of sectors that we work in for both public and private organisations. I have a background so I did Masters in Politics, Philosophy and Economics at Uni a few years ago, and then I have a History and English degree from Auckland. And then prior to joining Castalia, I worked at the McGuinness Institute, which is a non-partisan think tank based in Wellington. I did a lot of climate finance and reporting work there, and then I've also worked in marketing and strategy at a technology firm in London, and then also done some economics work during my master's degree at the Australian High Commission. So I also work in the Wellington office with Andreas and a bunch of other people here too.
Cool. Yeah, so today we're just going to run through what we do, and I'll start with who we are. So we're a global firm. We're multidisciplinary. So we're essentially consultants. We work in economics, finance, law, and policy. And what we really do is apply our thinking and our skills to solve some of the world's biggest infrastructure, resource, and policy challenges. So we're working on consulting assignments that come up regularly. So at the moment, I mean, Freya's probably got 2 or 3 different assignments she's working on. I'm working on a bunch as well. And we're working for governments, so the New Zealand government, governments around the Pacific and Southeast Asia, work for corporations, typically corporations that are regulated, like airports, like in the dairy industry, there's regulation, electricity lines companies, and then we also do a lot of work with international organisations that develop infrastructure and fund infrastructure, such as the World Bank, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail soon.
So just provide a quick snapshot of some of our New Zealand and international clients on the slide, and we're going to go through about 6 projects from some of these clients later on in this presentation. As Andrea said, a mix of government, public and private, and kind of companies that are regulated by the government in both New Zealand and international?
Yeah, so just as you can see, we've got, we're working with the central government, the Treasury, MBIE, and then we do work on core infrastructure companies like the Ports of Auckland, Auckland Airport, Watercare, which is the big water company up in Auckland, and we advise Ministry of Foreign Affairs on its aid and development programs around the Pacific and Southeast Asia. And then there's a selection of some of the large corporates like Contact, Mobile, and Z Energy, who we've recently done work with, Trade Me as well, on really with a focus on economic, financial, and regulatory advisory. So what we do, so we advise, so there on the slide is a picture of some solar panels out in the Pacific. So we typically do projects like help Ministry of Foreign Affairs design a financing facility that can help project developers in the Pacific that want to develop solar electricity projects to remove the dependency on diesel for generating electricity. So we would help the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, for example, that's a recent project, design a financing facility for solar projects. So use their aid, the government's dedicated some aid to improving outcomes in the Pacific. So we would help them design a facility that uses that aid effectively and promotes the efficient use of the natural resource, in this case, the solar resource. We also help on designing commercial, regulatory, and competition strategies. So we'll talk about what we've done on retail groceries in New Zealand when the Commerce Commission was looking at retail groceries. We've designed better markets and enabled competition. So in developing countries where they might have a monopoly provider of electricity, for example. So in the Solomon Islands, we're working up there at the moment to enable smart new ways of generating electricity and designing the markets to enable competition between generators of electricity and enable them to build projects in Solomon Islands that will ultimately lower the cost of electricity, which is actually the highest in the world, and some of the poorest people. So improving outcomes for them, lowering their power bills. We develop public-private partnerships and manage transactions. So, for example, we are currently advising in Federated States of Micronesia, which is a small state in the Northern Pacific, which wants to bring in competitive cellular phone providers. So currently it's just got one provider of telecommunications, and that's a very slow service and very expensive. So helping the World Bank there introduce improved cellular phone services and infrastructure under a public-private partnership, and then manage the transaction so that the government appoints the best provider for the lowest cost. And then we do things like reforms and regulation of infrastructure across the world, so including in New Zealand, and we'll talk about what we're doing on the water sector soon as well.
So on the slide, we provide a map of both our offices, which is the blue dot. So we've got offices in Wellington and Auckland, in Bogota, Colombia, Sydney, Paris, and Washington, DC. And then the colourful dots are some of the projects we've done globally under the key sectors that we work in, so energy, water, transportation, and telecommunications. And we'll go, as we said, we'll go into some of these projects in a bit more detail, but we are truly global in both our offices and our project work. Yeah, that's a good point, Freya. We link up with those global offices. So at least once a week we have a global
staff meeting, but we also build teams to do the project work that we need to do. So I'm regularly talking to Washington, DC colleagues on projects that we might be doing in the Pacific. We've worked with our colleagues in the Paris office on renewable energy in Southeast Asia. So it's really quite exciting, and that multicultural and multi-jurisdiction aspect of the job is really cool. And one thing that is an option, and we do offer, if with the right person and the right fit, and assuming we've got the right kind of projects, and then visa requirements as well are met, we can offer kind of secondments into other offices, if with those provisos. I don't want to sort of just make any major promises, but we do have we have had a couple of people pre-COVID go to Washington and work there, and every 2 years we have a retreat. Obviously not the last 2 years, but we have a retreat with the Australian Asia practice, so based out of Sydney, and we'll go over to Australia 1 year, and they'll come over here in the next year. So we rotate like that. So there's a bit of travel, and pre-COVID we were going around the Pacific Islands and into Southeast Asia a lot for our project work. So here we're just going to talk through some of the skills that we're really looking for. So economics is a key, and we're really part of the core of what we do. We will look at other disciplines, but the supply, demand and price formation, market equilibrium, utility maximization, those kind of concepts are really key, and we're looking for people that understand those things. If you do come from a different background, I mean, we're open to hearing about it and hearing your skill set, because there are other aspects to it, and there is an ability to learn, but really economics is really core to what we do. Finance is also critical. So, and some of these things you do learn on the job, but basic reading and understanding financial statements is really important to what we do. And then calculating financial ratios and doing project finance modelling. So we do hire people with modelling skills. It's not must have, but certainly if you do have modelling skills, then we'd really like to hear from you too. And we do hire people from other backgrounds, as I said, law, engineering, commerce, and other fields. Sector understanding is also important, but we recognise as students that you're not necessarily going to have direct exposure to these things, but this is the sort of stuff that you develop. So you understand how a PPP works, you understand structure of markets, and understand how infrastructure is funded and financed. And what we really look for as well is strong writing and presentation skills. Knowledge of foreign languages is a nice to have. It's not a must have, but for example, we do work in Indonesia a lot out of our Sydney office. So Bahasa speakers are really valued members of our team, and likewise we do work in Latin America out of the Washington office, and so Spanish speakers are important to us, as are French speakers for working in Francophone Africa and other French-speaking countries. So like a nice to have. In the New Zealand office, English is more than enough. Te reo. So just click through, so we've got all the text on the slide.
So I guess like at Castalia, what we kind of do and what we commit to is interesting and challenging work with plenty of variety. So you'll be working on a range of projects every week across sectors, across countries. We've got a very supportive and thorough onboarding process with a peer group. So you come in as a group of people in New Zealand and globally, and you'll work together and do learning-based exercises at the very beginning before you sort of start, and you'll do a bit of project work in that beginning, your first few months as well. And then you'll learn skills on the job and in training, and then we'll support you through professional development opportunities. What I really like, we have a flat hierarchy and opportunities, so we work closely with directors and managers in each of the projects, and experts, sector experts in each project. And then, as Andrea said, there's, in a non-COVID time, international travel opportunities as well.
So we just thought it would be interesting to just present some of our projects to you, just so you get an idea of like real world, like what we actually do day to day. So this was a project we did last year. So Z Energy, which you'll be familiar with, they wanted to know what their future fuel demand would be. So given that electric vehicles are growing in proportion and share of the national fleet, and also because the Climate Change Commission put out its draft emissions budget that had quite a steep drop-off in internal combustion engine vehicles, and therefore fuel demand over the next 25 years, past 2035. So they predicted quite a steep drop-off, and it was quite different to what most people in the sector had sort of thought. So they hired us to build an economic model that used econometric methods and quantitative methods to forecast fuel demand given take-up of EVs. So we used what, if there are any sort of tech people on this, call what's called a Bass diffusion curve, and we used that to sort of predict how many EVs would join the New Zealand fleet, and therefore and how vehicles would get more efficient, fuel efficient over time, and therefore what the fuel demand would be. And Z ended up using that in its stock exchange disclosures to investors. So it uses this modelling in its investor presentations to the market, because the market, the people that buy Z shares, well, Z's actually just been taken over by an Australian company, but before then it was people that invest in Z shares want to know how much fuel will be demanded in future. So our model was critical to that. Another project that's ongoing is you may have seen Three Waters in the news, the Three Waters reform. So the government is proposing to take water services that are currently provided by the 67 local authorities. So in Canterbury, you've got Christchurch City Council, which currently owns and operates the water, so that's drinking water, wastewater and stormwater system. So the government wants to put all of those council-owned and operated systems into 4 mega entities, and that's had a bit of pushback. And so I'm leading some work for 31 councils, including Christchurch City Council and Waimakariri District Council in your area. They're called Communities for Local Democracy, and they are proposing an alternative reform option to the government. So we're giving independent economic and strategic advice to these 31 councils on alternative reform models. So they've got a website. If you wanted to Google it, you can look at the reports that we've done if you wanted to get an idea of like what actually are our outputs. So we evaluated different ways of reforming the New Zealand water sector, and we're helping them try and influence the government to change or modify the model that it's proposing, which has proven to be controversial among the local government sector, but also just doesn't actually stack up economically. Like they've misinterpreted the economic evidence. They say there are economies of scale when there aren't, and so on. So we've provided a lot of that analysis and evidence to underpin that. And it is shifting debate, and so that's another part of it. The work kind of ends up in the headlines in this case. So, Freya, this is.
So this is a project I completed. Well, it was two projects actually, last year and into the beginning of this year. So we worked with the governments of Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu to look at climate change mitigation and adaptation projects that would help meet their NDC targets. This was quite an important project because of COP last year, so it was really sort of valuable to do this project last year. So we did a big scoping study of possible projects across a range of sectors, such as the energy sector, transport, waste, and marine, and looked at what would work within the specific country contexts. So this had a lot of stakeholder engagement with government ministries and NGOs and other stakeholders within each country. And then we provided implementation roadmaps, so looking at institutional barriers and opportunities, as well as investment plans, so looking at how each project could be most effectively funded and financed. And we provided a pipeline of projects for each country to help meet the NDC targets.
Cool, thanks. And here is another project that was around renewable energy. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it has an office in Laos, which is in Southeast Asia. It's between Thailand, Vietnam, and China. And so it has this office called the New Zealand Lao Renewable Energy Facility, and the Lao government needed to update its renewable energy strategy. And MFAT, Foreign Affairs, hired us to prepare that renewable energy strategy for the government. And so we travelled up there a lot and worked with the ministry and solved some of their kind of key issues. So one of the issues they've got is they've got vast hydro resources. So they've got the Mekong River and other rivers that have big hydro dams on them. And so in the wet season, they're actually exporting power to Thailand. But in the dry season, they need to import power. And the various parties have sort of proposed, so in the government and around the government, are proposing things like building a coal power plant. They've already done one and they're thinking about doing more, building a coal power plant to generate electricity in the dry season. So when the rivers are down and they don't have enough hydropower. And so we developed a renewable energy strategy across the electricity sector, transport, so EVs, which I actually was involved in, and we looked at hydrogen for storing energy between seasons. We looked at biofuels, so using some of the crops and biomass to try and as an energy source. And through this renewable energy strategy, and it's underpinned by some, a lot of economic analysis to show what's possible. We showed that actually dry season solar power plus a bit of wind, a bit of biomass was actually lower cost than the coal projects that had been proposed. And even once you start to take into account the emissions from the potential coal power plants, we showed that there is a credible kind of pipeline of projects that allow government could go to, say, the green energy finance and green energy financial institutions and say, look, we've got these solar projects, you could invest and stop us having to build coal power plants. So that was one cool project that ran about up to a year and involved travel up to Vientiane in Laos and meeting and assisting the ministry, the local energy ministry with this project. So it was both a project of writing the energy strategy, but also helping them take steps towards implementation through some training and workshops like that. And here's a project that's a bit closer to home, and so something you'll all be familiar with as supermarket shoppers. So New Zealand has two major grocery chains. So the Pack and Saves and the New Worlds are owned by Foodstuffs, and then you've got the Countdowns owned by Progressive Enterprises. And we were hired by the Food and Grocery Council, which represents all of the companies that supply supermarkets. So they represent, you know, the P&G, Procter & Gamble, but also down to like small producers of food and grocery. So they've got, you know, hundreds of members, the Commerce Commission carried out a market study. So you might have read about this in the news, a market study assessing the level of competition in retail grocery. And we worked with Food and Grocery Council to provide economic evidence into that process, so submissions into that retail market study to show that, you know, the major retailers were actually stifling competition and reducing competition, because stifling innovation and reducing competition in some of their relationships with suppliers, and that ultimately was harming consumers. And our analysis was quite influential in the final report. So for example, there's now a code of conduct that supermarkets have to abide by when they engage with suppliers. So they can't just cancel suppliers with no notice, and various other conduct matters. And at the moment, so the Commerce Commission, at the end of this market study, it started another market study into residential building supplies, which we're advising there, a group called the Affordable Building Coalition, which represents a range of parties that want to ensure that housing is built at lower cost, that building supplies, so your timber, your plasterboard and so on, is at very high prices. And we're helping there on preparing submissions to the Commerce Commission there. So I think that's the end. Oh, one more project. So Ports of Auckland is a long-standing client, and we work closely with them across a number of fronts. And one of them is, some of you might have read this, but a couple of years ago, under the previous Labour New Zealand First government, there was a commitment to look into moving the port from Auckland to Northport, which is Whangarei. And Ports of Auckland hired us to address the criticism that they were getting over people were saying that, well, this is all this prime waterfront land, it's not being used efficiently, that we better to move everything to Northport, and which is 100 kilometres away. And we peer reviewed the reports that the government had kind of commissioned to say that, well, the report, there's one report that said it, that the economics of moving the port stacked up. And we went through systematically looking at the costs of moving the port versus the benefits, and showed that, given all of the freight that needs to come into Auckland because it's consumed in Auckland, so all the stuff that gets imported and used in Auckland, the sheer freight task of getting that stuff on containers, and also the vehicles, like all the Teslas that are being imported into Auckland these days, they would have to come down by train from Northport or truck. And given that those costs, which we looked at, properly, it didn't really stack up, and that was then quite influential in the debate over whether to move. So the whole debate about moving is kind of simmered down again, is not really in the news. So that's it about our projects. So I think maybe, Freya, if you just cover off, what we're looking for, what being hired as an analyst involves.
Sure. So I think when I first started, you talk about all the projects, and then you actually think like, well, how do I sort of contribute to this work? So we have a weekly staff meeting, and we kind of discuss all the projects that are on at the time. You might be working on about 2 to 3, maybe sometimes more or less projects. It might be in multiple sectors and multiple service lines. So you might be doing, regulatory or competition or a bunch of different things. And then throughout the week, we'll also meet with clients, so weekly check-ins. You'll be working with other team members. So there's always a project manager who manages the project, and then you'll be working with a director and maybe another analyst as well. And then we also do business development. So that's sort of winning work. So going up to clients and saying how we can help them with the challenges that they have. So that might be writing proposals or writing sort of expressions of interest. And then we have in-house development courses. So right now I'm undertaking a finance course. So I do that during the week sometimes. And then we have sort of team social activities as well, like Friday drinks and welcome lunches. So it's a very balanced and varied week. And it's always very exciting, I would say.
Yeah, and so there is variety, but there's also, because we appreciate that when you start your career, it's not always clear what you want to do, but as you develop and as you identify things that you really enjoy doing, we try and ensure that you're working on the projects and in the sectors that you like and that excite you. So I have a bit of a specialisation in water and hydrogen and energy, and if that's something that interests you, then that's great. A colleague, Anton, who is based in the Auckland office, works a lot in the regulation of core infrastructure, and if that's something that's you really get interested in, so gas transmission, electricity distribution, if you're interested in that, then we'll ensure that you can work on that. So and so yeah, we're just getting to the end now, but on our website under the Join tab, we have a couple of ads live, and so we hire regularly, and we look to bring people in on a quarterly basis. So so you will, if you join, you're coming in with people that are also in a similar position and globally, but in New Zealand, like with grad recruitment, we try and get grads in when it makes sense. But if you're finishing mid-year, there's also scope to join this year, so in the third quarter of this year. But if you're finishing at the end of the year, then you may look to join in January, February. So yeah, that we've got a LinkedIn page if you want to check out what we're up to. So I think I put a post up today. It's World Water Day today, so we've got a LinkedIn post there. But the website, it's got a lot of information about the projects that we do if you wanted to have another look there. So I think we will now, just give anyone an opportunity to ask questions. So I didn't see any hands go up, but if there were questions during, I apologise.
Yeah, hi, I've got one. I was just wondering, how long do these kind of projects take?
That vary. So So that Lau project took up to about a year, whereas the ports of Auckland, that report probably took 6 to 8 weeks. On the water reform thing, I've been, this is a multi-year thing with intense periods of work on a report or helping. So they're going to be doing some select committee presentations, and I'll be helping with that. So that's going to come up in June. So I'll be working on it in June, but up until June, not much. So it can really vary, but.
You'd always normally work on like one sort of like long-term project and then maybe 2 shorter-term projects as well.
And I hate to say it, but I haven't heard of you guys before. I was just wondering, have you usually taken recruits? Because this is kind of exactly what I'm looking for in a job. So I'm just wondering why I haven't seen you before.
Good point. I think we don't have the resources of the big 4 accounting firms to kind of be, they've got permanent employees that just go out to universities and stuff. So we've kind of been doing this, if we've got the chance, and I've actually decided I want to do this a bit more systematically and really keen to just talk to students about what we do. So this is why you haven't heard about us, because we've sort of just started this. We focused on Victoria in the past, but we're doing it across the country now.
And we do take grads every year. It's not just don't need any if you have no experience. You don't need any. We take grads every year.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And how many do you take a year?
And this year we've had 2 start. So, and last year, or was it the year before, we had a Canterbury grad, who wanted to work out of Sydney and worked actually here in the Wellington office, but for the Sydney team, and then went over to Sydney. So that's also an option, but it's sort of like 2 to 3, could be 4, because we are growing and we're really busy at the moment. So, it could go up.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a widening sector, that kind of intersection of economics and environmental social stuff. So I love it. Thank you.
We've just had a message come through in the chat, and I'll just read it out for everyone. It's, do you see a space for civil engineering graduates at your company, or is it mainly economics and accounting?
So we will definitely consider engineers if they have an interest in economics and finance and looking at the costs and benefits of projects. So if you can kind of demonstrate that you've got those skills as well as your engineering, that's great. But you really need to have that interest. And often engineering students have those quantitative skills that we use a lot, so that can be valuable. So thanks for the question, good question.
This is a somewhat related question, but what other disciplines do you look to hire from other than finance and economics?
So that was really faint, but I think what you asked was what other disciplines do we look to hire from other than finance and economics?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, I've got a legal background, but also an economics background. And I think, we would consider other backgrounds. Just finance and economics is kind of core to what we do, and you need to either have a good grasp of it or be well on the way to having a good grasp of it. and fundamentally an interest in solving the types of problems that we tend to solve for clients.
Yeah, I would say I didn't have like a traditional, like very finance or economicsy background, but my master's provided me quite a lot of information doing the MPPE, but I was sort of on the way to develop the skills rather than having done, 4 years of straight economics and finance. So if that provides a little bit more.
Thank you. And are you only looking for graduates, or do you also have intern positions?
So the question again was a bit funny, but are we only looking for graduates, or do we hire interns? Yeah.
Yes.
So the answer is depends. So interns, like we have done it in the past, and it's on a case-by-case basis, but really if you are if you sort of can do potentially part-time, and then we're going to, once you graduate, you're going to become full-time. But so it's really difficult to answer that, and I would say on the whole, probably not. Like we don't have a program like some of the other accounting firms that do that every year. We don't do that.
Thanks.
I've just got another one come up. Do you know, like, if we don't get this job, do you know any other companies who are kind of in the same boat as you? Like, they haven't had enough funds to like advertise themselves much, but they do similar work?
So there are a few economic consulting firms around that so without naming names, I would just kind of look at who's doing the kind of analysis and advice that we're doing, say on the other side of the table, or like just Google it, or economic consulting firms, New Zealand kind of thing. I think we'd probably come up there, economics and policy consulting. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll just ask this on behalf of other students that won't be able to attend, but what does the application process look like for becoming a graduate?
So we have, we need your CV, obviously, your academic transcript, a kind of cover letter, what's been your motivation, and then we would do a initial review of that, and then you might then be shortlisted, and then from the shortlist we would, I think we have like a written assignment, an exercise in that's kind of modelled on what we might do typically day to day, like calculate the net present value of a particular project or something like that. And then I think we have a sort of critical reasoning test. So this is once you get through to the second stage, and then we would invite you to an interview. And it would be a panel interview of 3 people typically, and then you'd advance kind of to the next round of, and you might be invited to, say, if you were in Wellington, it might be to have a coffee with somebody, or just have a Zoom or a Teams catch up with, say, Freya or one of the other analysts in the team, and find out a bit about the day-to-day, and then if you're still keen, we might then proceed to make an offer. So that's kind of the process from start to finish broadly. I hope I haven't missed anything.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so it's castalia-advisors.com, and you can check out what we do on the website. And encourage you all to have a good look and consider applying. And just maybe, is there a last opportunity if you've got any questions about any of the projects or work that we do? Sophie.
So just about the application, is it the economic and financial analyst role? Because that on the website.
Go through that. Yeah, the economic and financial analyst role. Click on join, and then it should have a kind of job description, job ad for economic or financial analyst. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And if there's any more questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for the great presentation.
Thanks, everyone.
No worries. Very welcome. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Sorry, do just have one more. Just for you guys, how can we get in touch? Oh yeah, how can we get in touch with them? Do you have like their contacts or? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
I do have an email address, and if you just want to stay on the chat, I'll just message it to you now.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you.